Chapter 21:13. Zhou Chongguang's face was as black as it could get. Zhao Zi's words had indeed provoked him. So, this was the real reason why she wanted a divorce. Give me the address. He looked at Zhao Zi. Forget about your intentions. I won't get a divorce. Zhao Zi wiped his wound and said bitterly, then don't hurt her anymore. He lowered his head and wrote down the address. Xiao Yan will be at the restaurant tonight. He goes there every Friday. With that, Zhao Zi left to treat his wound and the wound in his heart. He did like Qin Mu, but he couldn't tell Qin Mu. Telling Chongguang was the only way to help her. Zhao Zi smiled desolately. He knew that he would never win Qin Mu's heart. Ever since he started dating Chongguang, he was no longer clean. In the office, Zhou Chongguang held the note tightly in his hand. 8 p.m. A new Western restaurant opened on the second ring road of B City. It was called Starlight in Chinese. It was opened by the youngest musician, Zhao Yan. Business was booming, especially on Friday nights. At 8 p.m. sharp, Yi Muyun's car stopped in the open-air parking lot. When he got out of the car, he instructed Guze, "Wait here for me for an hour." Guze nodded. But he sighed in his heart. "Mr. Yi, you're having dinner with your girlfriend. Why did you bring your assistant here?" Moreover, was an hour of lovesickness enough for Miss Song to complain? However, falling in love with Yi Muyun was already very tiring. Mr. Yi was so busy that he didn't have time to accompany his girlfriend. He was so busy that the girl took the initiative on every date. He was so busy that when Song Karen was mentioned, Mr. Yi would be slightly stunned, as though he had said the wrong name. The name in the depths of his memory should not have been completely erased from Yi Zichen's mind. Otherwise, Song Karen would have occupied the seat for a long time. Yi Zichen's age should have long reached the age of marriage, but there was still no movement. Sometimes, Guze even wondered if Mr. Yi was in love, or was he simply looking for a woman to remind himself that he had forgotten someone and no longer cared about her. Yi Muyun slowly walked into the restaurant. Song Karen had already arrived 10 minutes ago. She had booked a table with a very good view so that she could enjoy the piano performance. When Yi Muyun came in, he accidentally bumped into Qin Mu. The two of them had just met in the afternoon. Now that they saw each other again, they both felt a little strange. "Are you here to eat with Karen?" Qin Mu asked indifferently. Yi Muyun nodded lightly. Then, she looked inside. "Alone?" Qin Mu nodded. However, Yi Muyun did not have the intention to introduce his sister to Song Karen. Instead, he chose to stand beside her and talk. "I just found out that it's Xiao Yan's restaurant." Yi Muyun hit the nail on the head. He plays the piano quite well. Qin Mu naturally heard the hidden meaning in his words. She pursed her lips and said softly, "I thought you didn't like to listen to piano performances." Yi Muyun smiled faintly and changed the topic. "Did you go to see Zhou Chongguang this afternoon?" Qin Mu looked at him with a puzzled expression. "There's a hickey on your neck." Yi Muyun said casually. "Did you change your mind?" Qin Mu was a little embarrassed. She reached out and touched her neck. Then, she said the truth, "I saw him with a small celebrity in his company. I was forced." These words were enough to show that she still wanted a divorce. Chapter 21:14. Yi Muyun glanced at Zhao Yan, who had come over, and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Are you still a man who likes to play the piano?" This question was actually a little subtle. Qin Mu shook her head. "No, he plays very well. It's very artistic and enjoyable to listen to. That's all." Yi Muyun patted her shoulder and paused. "Actually, it doesn't matter if you like it." Zhao Yan was a good person, especially Di Feng and Jiue, and his character was also suitable for Qin Mu. Qin Mu still shook her head and suddenly said, "Brother, I want to go abroad." Yi Muyun froze for a moment. "Go out and have a look. I will come back." Qin Mu smiled, "Brother, you should go. Karen is waiting for you." Yi Muyun turned his head and saw Karen was already walking towards him. Obviously, Qin Mu did not want to have any contact with Song Karen, so she reminded him. Yi Muyun thought for a moment and walked over there, but stopped Song Karen halfway. "Qin Mu has an appointment." Song Karen wanted to say hello, but seeing that Yi Muyun had already sat down and Qin Mu had also gone to the front seat, she had to give up. She felt a little uneasy. She had been dating him for a long time, but until now, they still stopped at the stage of eating, and at most it was just a light kiss. Sometimes, she had already closed her eyes, but his kiss suddenly stopped. When she opened her eyes, she saw that his eyes were searching her face, and there was a slight pain in his eyes. Was she the one who made him feel pain? Song Karen slowly realized that he was looking for the shadow of another woman on her face. He had loved someone else, deeply, but she could not argue with him because no one had mentioned it. No one around him dared to mention that person's name. She was also uneasy because he did not take her home to meet his family. She was still his girlfriend, and there was no progress when they had known each other for 2 months. "I have already ordered the dishes, and they will be served in a moment." Song Karen's voice was sweet, "It can save time." "How much time do you have to eat today?" Yi Muyun said indifferently, "Let's do it at 9. Song Karen looked at the time. It was already 8:20. 40 minutes. Excluding the 30 minutes for lunch, she still had 10 minutes left. She couldn't help but feel disappointed, but she still tried to find a topic to talk to him. He looked at Qin Mu and found that she was alone, so he boldly said, "Mumu's friend doesn't seem to be here. Why don't we share a table with her?" Yi Muyun drank half a glass of apéritif. When he put down the glass, he said indifferently, "She's meeting the owner of the restaurant here, and also the person who's playing the song." Song Karen was stunned for a moment, then laughed, "I was being nosy. He is very handsome." However, she remembered that Qin Mu was married. It seemed that Mu Yun was very supportive of her coming out in public to look for the person she liked. Song Karen's heart was suppressing her worries, but she didn't dare to say anything. After she finally finished cooking the main meal, she finally found an opportunity. She placed a gilded invitation on the table. "There's an art exhibition in my gallery next week. Muyun, can you come?" Yi Muyun picked it up casually and said indifferently, "I may." After he opened it, he saw the names of several artists engraved inside. The second one was Tang Sher, whose English name was Ann. Chapter 21:15. Qin Mu had told him that she was back, but he hadn't expected her to come back so openly. Did she really think that he wouldn't bother with her after some time and that everything would be over? Song Karen was a little disappointed when she heard those 3 words. He wouldn't be free. However, the words in Yi Muyun's mouth took a turn and became, "I might not be too busy." Song Karen's eyes lit up with surprise and excitement. She was so excited that she didn't know what to say. "I'll be there on time." He stood up and smiled lightly. "I have to keep a low profile. I'll only be attending as a private." Song Karen understood and watched him leave. Just like before, he wouldn't send her home or say some sweet nothings to her, but it was enough now. At least he valued her enough. Song Karen's eyes were red. She felt that Zhao Yan's performance of Die Liebe on the stage was amazing. She even wondered if she could ask Zhao Yan to play this song when she and Mu Yun got married. It would be a dream. Outside the restaurant, Yi Muyun called Guze. I don't need the car. You can drive it back. Guze was stunned. Was it going to rain? Mr. Yu was going to spend the night with Miss Song. Guze didn't leave immediately and sat in the car. After a while, he saw Yi Muyun walk out alone and walk towards a dark place. That dark place lit up with a red light that moved up and down. Mr. Yu was smoking. He wasn't with Song Karen but was smoking alone. Guze narrowed his eyes and his gaze flickered. He saw that Zhou Chongguang was sitting in the car opposite. Zhou Chongguang had one hand outside the car window and a cigarette in his other hand, but his eyes were fixed on the restaurant. He looked like he was catching his wife cheating on him. Guze frowned. Was Qin Mu inside too? On the other side, Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Mu in the restaurant. What Zhao Zi said was true. He saw Qin Mu holding her chin like a young girl and looking at Zhao Yan who was playing the guqin. Her whole body was like a fan. This was his wife, yet she was looking at another man with such a gaze. He snorted coldly. Just because Zhao Yan could play the zither. He watched as she smiled at Zhao Yan and chatted happily with him. He was almost certain that she had fallen in love with someone else. Sure enough, her taste hadn't changed at all. She liked the Prince of Piano. No wonder she said that he was dirty. In fact, it was not because of him and other women, but because she had found a new target. Compared to Zhao Yan, he, Zhou Chongguang, was indeed full of the stench of money. After Zhou Chongguang smoked a pack of cigarettes, Qin Mu finally came out. Zhao Yan personally walked her to the door. They smiled and said goodbye. They even hugged. Qin Mu walked to her car. Just as she was about to open the door, a pair of strong arms hugged her from behind. Are the men and women of the dogs so open and aboveboard now? Zhou Chongguang's voice was clear. Zhao Yan is a public figure. Aren't you afraid of ruining your own future by hugging a married woman so openly? Qin Mu was shocked at first, but then she realized it was him. She paused for a moment and then said mockingly, Lin Shui seems to be a public figure too. She's just a third-rate celebrity. Zhou Chongguang said indifferently, I never thought about having a future with her. What about you, Mrs. Zhou? You want to marry Zhao Yan. Don't forget that your family and the Tang family are enemies now. Chapter 21:16. Qin Mu paused for a moment and looked down. Zhou Chongguang, I'm not as picky as you. I don't want to take anyone to bed with me. After saying that, she was bitten hard on her neck. He seemed to be venting his anger. Not only did he bite her neck, but he also bit the thin flesh on her ear. Qin Mu couldn't take it anymore and said angrily, Zhou Chongguang, this is a public place. You're shameless, but I'm shameless. Then let's go home and do it. His swallowing movements became slow and seductive. Moo, huh? Qin Mu's body stiffened. After a while, she chuckled. I'm different from you. What's the difference? Can we get used to each other? He kissed her neck. If coaxing her could make her give up on the idea of divorce, then he was willing to bow his head for the time being. The difference between humans and animals. Qin Mu said softly and pushed Zhou Chongguang away. Zhou Chongguang took 2 steps back and stood still. The two of them looked at each other under the neon lights. There were stars in her eyes. It was like her tears. Qin Mu, will you still cry for me? Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little hoarse. He raised his hand and wanted to touch her, but she avoided him. He smiled and said mockingly, now that there's a new person, you've forgotten the old one. Qin Mu, don't forget that I haven't signed the contract yet. You're still my wife, Zhou Chongguang. He always minded that she might have reached that step with Zhao Yan. Qin Mu didn't want to talk to him. She pursed her lips. You can think of it that way. Her gaze fell into the distance. Zhou Chongguang, I can love anyone in this world, but I can't love you. She then opened the door and got into the car. When she closed the door, she swung it so hard that she almost pinched Zhou Chongguang's hand. The car slowly drove away. Zhou Chongguang did not chase after it. He just looked at it calmly, feeling inexplicably irritated. She was serious. She really wanted to divorce him. The relationship between her and Zhao Yan was probably real. Not bad. First, find a spare tire, then bring up the divorce. She had grown up. Zhou Chongguang smoked 2 cigarettes on the spot before getting into his car and speeding away. All of this fell into Gu Zhe's eyes. He sat in the car, and it was dark inside. He could see outside, but the people outside couldn't see him. Looking at all this, he could guess that Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang seemed to have really fallen out. It was not strange at all. If Qin Mu didn't have that illness and happened to meet Zhou Chongguang, she might not have been so hell-bent on him for so many years. Now that he was awake, it was good. The reason why Gu Zhe didn't go out was that it was inconvenient for him to do so. He was Gu Mei's brother, and Gu Mei and Zhou Chongguang had an illicit relationship. If he were to save Qin Mu. What a joke. Zhou Chongguang drove very fast. He arrived at the villa at Qingshui Road almost at the same time as Qin Mu. When he got out of the car, Qin Mu happened to get out as well. She always had a good demeanor. Even after so many things happened today, she still got out of the car slowly, but her expression was a little lazy. When she saw him return, she didn't say anything and just went upstairs. Zhou Chongguang followed slowly with a gloomy face. When they reached the bedroom upstairs, Qin Mu sat on the sofa and rubbed her forehead. She said calmly, "Your luggage is here." Zhou Chongguang looked over and saw 2 suitcases. Chapter 21:17. Zhou Chongguang raised his eyebrows and glanced around the bedroom. Sure enough, he couldn't find any trace of him living here. She had cleaned it up. Even the wedding photo was gone. There was only a landscape painting hanging in the original place. What about the wedding photo? Did you throw it away too? He asked casually. Qin Mu replied, "It's useless to keep it." She opened her eyes slowly and looked at Zhou Chongguang. "I'll put the apartment up for sale next week." "You're not going to keep anything, are you?" Zhou Chongguang sneered. "Qin Mu, have all your infatuation disappeared?" She didn't say anything but just looked at him sideways. The warm yellow light shone on her face, making her look especially bright and clean. As he looked at her, he couldn't help thinking that she was blessed by the heavens. After so many years, or rather, the past 2 or 3 years, she had obviously not been happy, but she still looked the same as before. Qin Mu was the kind of person who had the innocence of a 22-year-old, but she had the charm and calmness of a 30-year-old. If he let her out like this, she would be eaten alive immediately. She must not know how seductive she was. Zhou Chongguang's eyes became a little red just thinking about it. He squinted his eyes and looked at her slightly red cheeks. She had drunk wine. He was sure almost immediately. After a while, he said slowly, "I'll find a house as soon as possible and stay in a hotel for the time being. If you change your mind, you can call me or look for me at the company." Qin Mu sighed softly. "Zhou Chongguang, if this is what you want to do, you don't have to do it." She looked up and looked straight into his eyes. "I won't change my mind." He believed her words. She had never been a pretentious woman. She had always been firm and stubborn. She would stick to one path until there was no other way. Was he the one who made her feel that there was no other way? Zhou Chongguang looked at Qin Mu silently for a long time before he said, I won't agree to divorce. But I must leave you. Qin Mu rubbed her slightly aching forehead. Zhou Chongguang, can you be reasonable? Reason? His expression was extremely ugly. Unbeknownst to her, he had already pulled her into his embrace. Qin Mu was shocked. Then, she struggled and said, Zhou Chongguang, are you crazy? What about after the divorce? Are you going to be with that gigolo Zhao Yan? Zhou Chongguang's voice was cold. You can't wait to climb into his bed. Qin Mu couldn't take it anymore and slapped him. Enough. After a crisp sound, the world became quiet. This was the first time they had hit each other before and after marriage, and she was the one who hit him. Zhou Chongguang's face was completely dark. He narrowed his eyes and said, Qin Mu, give up on the divorce. As he said that, he pulled forcefully. Chun Mu shrieked. And he ignored her struggle and forced himself on her for the second time today. Qin Mu struggled and screamed, but she couldn't stop him. The 28-year-old Zhou Chongguang was no longer the teenager he used to be. He was a well-built man with a six-pack. He dominated her fiercely. When she didn't listen, he grabbed her hand, raised it high, and pinned her firmly. She didn't respond, so he used all kinds of despicable ways to force her to scream. Chapter 21:18. Perhaps it was because the commotion was too loud, the servants knocked on the door and asked worriedly, Sir, Madam. Get lost. Zhou Chongguang's voice was full of anger and desire, followed by a string of ambiguous sounds. The servants blushed and did not know what to do. In the bedroom, Zhou Chongguang looked down at her from above and pinched her chin with one hand. Am I more able to satisfy you, or him? Qin Mu shook her head and could not say a word. She was bullied to the point that she was in tears. That pathetic and pitiful look could arouse a man's desire to conquer her. Tell me, am I better, or is he better? His eyes were bloodshot as he forced himself on her while saying shameless words. After their marriage, he had always been cold and restrained in bed, and he had never used any of his tricks on her. Tonight, he was stimulated and used all of them. The more she did not say anything, the more he wanted to force her to break down. In the end, a man's deep-rooted bad habits won out. He was probably too angry and actually did something that crossed the line. Qin Mu's eyes widened and she looked at him in disbelief. Since he had already done it, he had no reason not to enjoy it to the end, so he narrowed his eyes. When he was done, Qin Mu could not help but rush to the bathroom and vomit on the toilet bowl. She only fell to the side after she had vomited almost all her bile. Zhou Chongguang stood quietly at the door of the bathroom, like an evil god. He went forward, grabbed Qin Mu and kissed her lips. He carried her to the shower, but he still didn't let her go. Tonight, he seemed to have gone crazy. Qin Mu was in a daze. When she woke up, he was still doing it. When she fainted, he was still doing it. It was not until dawn that he completely let her go. The two of them lay flat on the bed. The air was filled with the scent of intimacy between a man and a woman. Although they were so close, their hearts were so far apart. Qin Mu closed her eyes and said weakly, Zhou Chongguang, it's useless. Do you dare to say that you're uncomfortable, that you didn't enjoy it? He opened his sharp eyes and pinched her chin. I can move out for a while, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to give up on marriage. Qin Mu, we'll talk after you've thought it through. As he spoke, he rose to his feet, his movements elegant. Qin Mu didn't move until he put on his clothes. Only then did she squeeze out a word from her throat, get lost. Zhou Chongguang's expression was ugly, but he endured it in the end. By the time he left, the sky was already bright. A man naturally needed to rest after a night of indulgence, but he knew that with him here, she wouldn't be able to rest well. As he said, he was willing to give her time. However, most of the reason was because of his roughness last night. He had never been so rough with a woman, not even the women he paid to beat. Qin had always been soft and tender. She must have been injured last night. Zhou Chongguang turned his car around again. He went to a pharmacy to buy medicine and returned to the house in Qingshui Road. When he walked through the hall, the servants looked at him with a complicated expression. Zhou Chongguang went upstairs, but he didn't see Qin. He came down again and caught a maid. "Where's Madam?" Chapter 21:19. Zhou Chongguang furrowed his brows. "Which hospital?" The servant shook his head. "I don't know, but you can call old Zhao." Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. He didn't have old Zhao's number or the contact information of the people around her. Usually, she would stay at home and nothing would happen. She would only ask him if he was coming home for dinner. There had never been a situation where he couldn't find her when he came home. So, he didn't need to know. At the same time, Zhou Chongguang remembered that she hadn't called him in the past 2 or 3 years. She didn't care if he came home or if he had eaten. The more he thought about it, the more anxious he felt. He got into the car and lit a cigarette. Then, he called Zhao Zi. "Check old Zhao's number." "What's wrong?" Zhao Zi frowned. For some reason, Zhou Chongguang was especially willing to tell Zhao Zi that he had injured Qin. He probably wanted him to give up. "I didn't control it well last night. Qin was injured. Old Zhao sent her to the hospital." Zhou Chongguang took a drag and blew out smoke rings. His gaze was unfathomable in the smoke. Zhao Zi's voice was a little tense. "What happened to her?" "Zi, she is still my wife." Zhou Chongguang lowered his voice. Zhao Zi's voice was also a little cold. "She asked for a divorce. But I exercised my rights as a husband last night." Zhou Chongguang's voice was very low. "Zi, you'd better give up on that idea. I won't let her go." On the other side, Zhao Zi said mockingly after a while, "Then I'll have to trouble Zhou Zong to find the number yourself. From today onwards, I'm taking a month off." With that, he hung up. Zhou Chongguang wanted to smash his phone. He was extremely depressed. His woman wanted a divorce and his brother was betraying him. In the end, he still called Gumei. Gumei quickly gave him old Zhao's number. However, Gumei still asked softly, "Do you start to care about her?" Zhou Chongguang sneered, "Gumei, she is my wife. Shouldn't I care about her?" Gumei chuckled. "But when have you ever treated her as your wife?" With that, she hung up the phone. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. This time, he really smashed his phone. When he arrived at Xingyuan Hospital, she had already entered the VIP ward. Lao Zhao scratched his head at the door. "It's nothing serious. It's just a little torn." Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little ugly. Old Zhao's gaze was subtle. "Then I'll go back to get some things. Mr. Zhou, please take care of him here." Zhou Chongguang nodded. "Bring someone to take care of her." Old Zhao understood. It was more convenient to have a woman to take care of him. However, he had lived in this small home for several years, and this was the first time the young couple had been like this. He didn't expect that they would be sent to the hospital so quickly. This was a matter between husband and wife. How could he be so rough? After all, old Zhao was just a driver and a rough man. It wasn't appropriate for him to say these words out loud, so he kept it to himself. After old Zhao left, Zhou Chongguang walked into the ward. Qin had probably fallen asleep because she was too tired. He walked over and looked at her quietly. Her little face was a little pale as it rested on the pillow. Her long black hair covered half of her face, and she was also wrapped around the snow-white pillow. Chapter 21:20. Zhou Chongguang resisted the urge and reached out his hand to touch her forehead. It was very hot. At this time, the nurse came in and looked at Zhou Chongguang. She asked impatiently, "Are you a family member of the patient?" Actually, they all knew each other. Who didn't know Mr. Ye's sister and brother-in-law? Zhou Chongguang nodded. The nurse sneered, "You're ruthless. Don't tell me this is sexual pleasure. This is domestic violence, rape." Zhou Chongguang was about to lose his temper when the nurse restrained her voice. "Do you know what kind of harm your behavior will cause to women? Minor injuries, and serious ones can even lead to lifelong infertility." Infertility. Zhou Chongguang was about to lose his temper, but he suddenly calmed down. "If you don't cherish a wife like Miss Qin, you'll regret it if you lose her." The nurse lectured, "How good are the women outside?" Zhou Chongguang's eyebrows twitched. The nurse's words revealed a piece of information. Everyone in City B probably knew about Zhou Chongguang's dissolute deeds. There are many rich men who play with women, but none of them are as young and beautiful as his wife. The nurse's voice was a little sad. "If you don't love her, let her go." After that, he finished his work. He glanced at Zhou Chongguang, signed his name, and left. Zhou Chongguang's eyes fell on Qin Mu, who was lying on the bed. His gaze was a little complicated. "Did you also know about me from them?" Except for that time in the office, had she ever seen him outside, with other women? Suddenly, Zhou Chongguang felt that it was reasonable that she didn't love him anymore. Yes, what was there for her to miss about a man who fooled around outside? Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. Since when did he become too lazy to deal with her? That's why he didn't care about what she knew. Was he sure that she wouldn't make a fuss after knowing, or did he want her to make a fuss? In the end, she didn't cry or make a fuss. She put up with him for 2 or 3 years, and then told him that she didn't love him anymore. In the end, it seemed that he was the one who suffered. Even now, there was a trace of guilt in his heart, but he still couldn't let go of her. He thought that he might be able to restrain himself for her. If she didn't like Gu Mei's existence, he would transfer Gu Mei to the overseas branch company. If she didn't like Lin Shui, he would dump Lin Shui. Anyway, there was still Zhao Shui and Li Shui, so he didn't really care. What he needed to do now was not to take back her heart, to make her fall in love with him again. Then, as before, she waited for him at home. He should come home often. Once a week with her could be changed to 3 times a week. This frequency was enough for a woman. He could take his time with her in all of this. The gentleness in Zhou Chongguang's eyes was quietly replaced by scheming. But this time, he had miscalculated. He had lost her, and he had lost himself. When Qin Mu woke up, Zhou Chongguang was still in the ward. Seeing her wake up, he smiled and said, "Are you feeling better?" Qin Mu looked at him and didn't say a word. She turned her face to the other side. He knew that she was angry because of his rudeness last night, so he said in a low voice, "Tell me next time it hurts." "There won't be a next time." Qin Mu's voice sounded strange. "If there's a next time, I will sue you for marital rape." "You don't care, but your company can't have such a scandal." Chapter 21:21. Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything else. He stayed by her side and watched her close her eyes in pain. After a while, he still didn't collapse. He said softly, "Is it very painful?" Qin Mu opened her eyes and looked at him expressionlessly. "Why didn't you ask me if it was painful when you were having fun?" Zhou Chongguang was stunned for a moment and sighed. "Have a good rest." Qin Mu closed her eyes and ignored him. When old Zhao came over, Zhou Chongguang hadn't left yet. Old Zhao was stunned for a moment and said softly, "Sir, why don't you go back to the hotel to rest first?" Zhou Chongguang looked at old Zhao, and old Zhao said in shock, "Well, I brought your luggage here for you, Mr. Zhou." Zhou Chongguang sneered. "You're really loyal." Old Zhao was silent for a while and said slowly, "Miss hasn't been happy in the past few years." "Is she happy now?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little absent-minded. "Did Zhao Yan bring her happiness?" Old Zhao couldn't say it. He just said frankly, "There's no love, and it's meaningless to be tied together. Fortunately, there are no children." Zhou Chongguang's gaze fell on Qin Mu's lower abdomen. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Maybe she's already pregnant." At this moment, he was actually looking forward to the birth of a child. At least, he would give up on her thoughts of divorce. He knew Qin Mu. If she had a child, she would probably give up and accept her fate. Moreover, if she had a child, she wouldn't be so bored. Her heart would be at home and she wouldn't worry about gains and losses. That was the current situation. Zhou Chongguang was trying to keep this marriage, but he still kept it. It was just a habit for him to treat Qin Mu. He said in a low voice, "If she has a child, she won't abandon him." Old Zhao didn't know what to say for a moment. "You guys go back first and come over in the afternoon." Zhou Chongguang's voice was slightly deep. He had a meeting in the afternoon, so he could accompany her in the morning. Old Zhao froze for a moment, but in the end, he gave in. No matter what, Zhou Chongguang was still the Mrs. Legal husband, so he had to respect him. Lao Zhao left first and brought Zhou Chongguang's luggage with him. Zhou Chongguang had originally planned to move away, but now he changed his mind. At least for the time being, he didn't want to leave. He hadn't slept all night, so he leaned against the side of the bed. Just a little bit, he heard her weak voice, "Don't let me go. Zhou Chongguang. I don't love you anymore, I want to divorce you." He opened his tired eyes and listened to her say such heartless words. He found that his heart was a little numb. He wiped the sweat off her forehead with a towel. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "You don't love me anymore because of that woman outside? If I cut off all the women outside, will you change your mind?" She was still asleep, and could not answer him. Zhou Chongguang kept watch until noon, but she still didn't wake up, or she didn't want to see him when she woke up. Zhou Chongguang whispered in her ear, "Mumu, I'll go to the company first. We'll talk about it tonight." She only needed to be on the drip for 2 days. The doctor said that she could go back at night. Qin Mu ignored him and continued to pretend to be asleep. Zhou Chongguang felt a little helpless, so he went back first. After he left, Qin Mu turned around and looked at the closed door. She lay there, thinking about what had happened in the past 2 days. Chapter 21-22. But it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean that he had feelings for her. If he had feelings for her, he wouldn't have had so many women outside. Qin Mu closed her eyes and felt much better. She asked the servants who came to take care of her to prepare some food. She had brought Xiang from the Qin family. She asked worriedly, "Should we tell Madam?" Qin Mu was stunned for a moment and said, "Don't tell her. My mother will worry about it again." Her mother and brother had always had a knot in their hearts because of her. Although they didn't say it, the crack was deep inside. How could she not know? Xiang nodded. Qin Mu propped herself up and looked at Xiang. "Where's Uncle Zhao? Let him in." Xiang was stunned for a moment and immediately went to call him. After a while, Lao Zhao came in and saw Qin Mu lying weakly on the hospital bed. His heart felt stifled. Zhou Chongguang had gone too far. Qin Mu's voice was gentle. Did Zhou Chongguang not take his things with him? Lao Zhao hesitated for a moment and nodded. Qin Mu thought for a moment. Then book a hotel for me. I won't be going back. If he wanted to stay there, let him stay there. Lao Zhao was stunned. Miss, how can you do that? Ah, Xiang can stay with me. Zhou Chongguang will move out in 2 days. Qin Mu said calmly and confidently. Although Zhou Chongguang didn't love her, she had some understanding of his character. He was also a little arrogant, Lao Zhao understood. He asked Ah Xiang to go back and pack her things while he stood guard outside. When Qin Mu came out, she still walked a little unnaturally. Lao Zhao wanted to help her but she refused. Uncle Zhao, let me walk by myself. In the future, she would go abroad alone. She would go to many places alone. There was no one she could rely on. Lao Zhao put down his hand and walked in front of Qin Mu, guarding the elevator. The elevator only came up after about 2 minutes. Qin Mu was stunned when she saw the person who came out. That was Gu Zhe, Gu Mei's brother and also someone close to her brother. He used to be a special assistant and now he was equivalent to her brother's position. He was the vice president of Boyi, which was a high position. As for Gu Zhe, Qin Mu didn't want to stay too much because he was Gu Mei's brother. Qin Mu's little face tensed up and he didn't make a sound. He waited for the people in the lift to come out before he wanted to enter. But Gu Zhe stopped her. Qin Mu. Qin Mu's body froze. He turned back to look at Gu Zhe and asked coldly, Mr. Gu, is there anything? Gu Zhe pursed his lips. The director here called Boss Yi and said that you came over to get some drip. Boss Yi asked me to come and take a look. Go back and tell my brother that I'm fine. Qin Mu didn't give him a good look. Is it because of Zhou Chongguang? Qin Mu's face darkened. She sneered. I think it'll be faster if you ask Gu Mei. She didn't want to talk to him, but Gu Zhe grabbed her arm. I just want to ask you. She didn't want to talk to him, but Gu Zhe grabbed her arm. I just want to ask you. Qin Mu was a little embarrassed. She looked at Lao Zhao and said, Uncle Zhao, chase this person away. Lao Zhao waved his hand. Miss, I'm an old man. I'm no match for Mr. Gu. Qin Mu stomped her feet in anger, but this stomp caused her to feel pain in her legs. She frowned in pain. Gu Zhe was a man. He saw what happened last night. It was very likely that Zhou Chongguang had hit her. Chapter 21-23. Gu Zhe, what are you doing? Why are you carrying me? Qin Mu's voice was reserved. After all, strictly speaking, she was the master and he was the servant. Gu Zhe ignored her struggle and carried her directly to the elevator, locking Lao Zhao outside. Lao Zhao was not only not annoyed, he was even happy. Mr. Gu looked so manly and his gaze clearly showed that he was interested in Mississippi. But there was one thing that was difficult, and that was that Mr. Gu's sister was Zhou Chongguang's mistress. In the elevator, there were only Gu Zhe and Qin Mu. Now that he had calmed down, Gu Zhe regretted, he had crossed the line. But he had already crossed the line and he had no reason to let her go. Hugging her, he looked at her angry face in the mirror and asked softly, did he hit you? Yes, are you happy now? Qin Mu sneered, Gu Zhe, you should be happy. Your sister is one step closer to being Mrs. Zhou. Gu Zhe frowned, I've never thought of it that way. What about Gu Mei? Has she thought about it? Qin Mu sneered, Gu Zhe, I don't love Zhou Chongguang anymore. I'm going to divorce him, but it doesn't mean that I can live in peace with the Gu family and even accept your so-called kindness. Guzay looked at her but did not say a word. Now, there were only 2 sentences left in his world. She didn't love Zhou Chongguang anymore. She was going to divorce Zhou Chongguang. He did not know why he was so happy. Anyway, his world was filled with pink bubbles called Qin Mu. But it was only for a moment. Because he was Guzay, Qin Mu's brother, she could be with anyone but him in this lifetime. Guzay smiled bitterly. Where are you going? Let me send you. Qin Mu was silent for a while. Mr. Gu, just leave me in the hall. I really can't accept your kindness. She looked up, but her eyes met his deep and clear ones. Guzay was 30 years old, 2 years older than Yimuyun. He was a very reserved man, and his appearance here today was not only because of his brother's order. Qin Mu was already 22 years old. She knew everything that she should know. She was not any less sensitive as a woman. For a moment, the atmosphere was a little strange. The elevator door opened, but nobody noticed it. At that moment, Guzay knew that she had found out. He had discovered his hidden thoughts. However, in front of a little girl, a seasoned man like him would not lose face. He coughed lightly. We're here. He walked out. Because of his guilty conscience, he quickly put her down. However, he did not abandon her directly. Instead, he waited for old Zhao to come over. I'll take my leave first. Guzay smiled faintly, smiling somewhat helplessly. Qin Mu stopped him. Guzay turned his head and looked at her. Mr. Gu, I'll be going abroad. Qin Mu said lightly. Guzay understood. He looked at her deeply for a long time before saying softly, Thank you for telling me. This was Qin Mu's kindness. She was telling him that it was impossible for them to be together, and asking him not to wait. Actually, she had always been smart and kind. All these years, she had suffered, she had felt guilty. She did not even blame Zhou Chongguang, as long as they broke up peacefully. As for Gu Mei, she had never really hurt her. Guzay was a little sad. Such a girl should be cherished. But if she wanted to fly, then he would watch her fly, and not break her wings. Chapter 21-24. Old Zhao stared blankly for a long time before he complained, Mr. Gu is such a good man, unlike Zhou Chongguang, who is so cunning. He's so successful without any scandals. Qin Mu looked at the door and then at old Zhao. Uncle Zhao, your expectations of men are too low. Isn't it normal not to have scandals? Can a man be called a good man if he doesn't indulge in debauchery? Old Zhao said sulkily, but I can see that Mr. Gu likes Mississippi. Qin Mu didn't say anything. Old Zhao sighed again. It's a pity that he is Gu Mei's brother. This relationship was too complicated. Forget it. Old Zhao drove Qin Mu to Wenhua Hotel and booked a high-class suite. Ah Xiang followed them. When old Zhao left, a black Audi looked in the direction of old Zhao's departure and then looked up at the hotel. The person sitting in the car was Guzay. His fingertips were burning and he was smoking absent-mindedly. Actually, she had made it quite clear, but he still didn't give up and followed her. Just like how he had been following her for the past few years, it had become a habit. He had seen her cry, laugh, and look at her extremely satisfied look. She was quite good now, so good that he didn't dare to disturb her. There was also a time when he was happy because her relationship with Zhou Chongguang was breaking up. That kind of joy was also dark and unknown. Guzay smoked lightly, thinking that he was not an ordinary person after all. In his heart, there was also greed. He knew that it was impossible, but it wasn't that he didn't desire it. Just like just now, it was just that he was ruthlessly rejected. Guzay smoked, then started the car and left slowly. There was a kind of protection that she didn't need to know. That night, when Zhou Chongguang returned to the house in Qingshui Road, Qin Mu wasn't there. The servants at home said timidly that Miss didn't come back. Zhou Chongguang didn't make things difficult for them. He just walked upstairs to the bedroom and looked at the empty room. This used to be his home. It was his and Qin Mu's home. In the beginning, he came back every day. Later on, he didn't come back often. On those nights when he was drunk, he was often accompanied by different perfumes. He didn't think much of it. He found a trace of comfort in these similar faces. However, he would definitely go back once a week because he didn't want his wife to have an affair because of physical reasons. He would give it to her once a week, thinking it was enough for her age. He was used to seeing things, but she was as clean as a young girl. Slowly, he began to feel bored. She was too dense. He started to cope, just to vent, but when he touched her beautiful body, he would occasionally go crazy. Finally, he got tired of it. Zhou Chongguang lay there. He knew that she did not come back because he refused to leave. He smiled. Could he still stay here and not leave? Therefore, he took out his phone and dialed Qin Mu's number. It was only 8:00. She probably wasn't asleep yet. When the call went through, Zhou Chongguang's voice was very soft. "Where are you?" Qin Mu was also lying on the bed. Her voice was calm. "I'm at the hotel." After that, Zhou Chongguang was silent for a long time before saying, "Move back tomorrow." "I'm leaving." Qin Mu said okay and hung up the phone. Zhou Chongguang looked at the phone with a gloomy expression. Chapter 21-25. He lay on the bed and couldn't fall asleep again. The moment he closed his eyes, he saw the 14-year-old Qin Mu sitting in the dining room, watching him play the piano. Qin Mu, such a deep love, how could she just throw it away like that? He had used some tricks. He came back the same night Qin Mu came back. He told her that he had come to get something, but he didn't take it with him when he left early in the morning. She didn't say anything, but just opened the bedroom door for him to take it. She stood at the door with a defensive look. Zhou Chongguang only took a leather suitcase. "I've tidied it up again. Those are not very useful. You can throw them away if you want." Qin Mu nodded. It seemed that there was no reason to stay. Zhou Chongguang put down the suitcase and looked at her. "Can I hug you again? You can say goodbye 10 times after you sign it." She leaned against the door, looking very cold. Zhou Chongguang suddenly laughed, walked in front of her, and gently pinched her soft little face. "You seem to have a personality now." Qin Mu ignored him and turned her face away. He didn't care, just smiled, picked up the suitcase and left. When he left, no one in the house said anything. Zhou Chongguang laughed at himself. In their hearts, he wasn't a good husband. 2 days after he left, Qin Mu tidied up the things in the house and put them up for sale. She started to apply for the visa while looking for a buyer. At the headquarters of Glory Entertainment, Zhou Chongguang sat behind the desk, frowning and looking at Gu Mei. "Get someone to buy that house. Also, put some effort into Qin Mu's visa. Don't let her get it done so quickly." She was going abroad. She couldn't wait to fly away from him. Zhou Chongguang took a drag of his cigarette. "After these 2 things are done, Gu Mei, pack up and go to the New York branch." Gu Mei was stunned. "Chongguang, does this represent your choice? Banish her and return to her family." Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Gu Mei, you're a smart person. You're by my side because you spent 3 years in prison for me. Don't you know how I feel about you?" Gu Mei's lips trembled slightly. "What about Qin Mu?" Are you in love with her? No. Zhou Chongguang said firmly, but I don't want to divorce her. If he had to sacrifice Gumei to maintain his marriage, he would not hesitate. Gumei closed her eyes. Why not banish them completely? Zhou Chongguang, that's because you. She opened her eyes, and there was a hint of mockery in them. Because you don't want to change for her. I'm curious, how long does Zhou Zong have to be a good husband? Zhou Chongguang's voice was cold and ruthless. 1 year, maybe 2 years, until she gives birth. Gu Mei's face turned pale. She murmured, you really don't have a heart. She looked at him and asked softly, Zhou Chongguang, aren't you afraid that you'll really fall in love with her one day and she'll never turn back? Her intuition told her that as long as Zhou Chongguang used a little trick, Qin Mu would return to him. But what would she do when she found out the truth? Qin Mu won't be able to take it. Have you forgotten her illness? Gu Mei asked in disbelief. Zhou Chongguang's lips curled up slightly. All these years, she knows a lot of things. Gu Mei, she's not the little girl she used to be. There was a strange look in Zhou Chongguang's eyes. Chapter 21-26. Although his wife was Qin Mu, he was used to that family. When Qin Mu said she wanted to leave, she was like his enemy. Gu Mei's whole body was cold. Zhou Chongguang only showed his true colors in front of her. But she had an unspeakable heartache. He let her know again and again that she liked a devil, not a ray of sunshine. Because of Zhou Chongguang, the house was sold quickly, but Qin Mu couldn't get a visa to go to the United States. She didn't want to live in the Qin mansion, so she moved into a hotel, and all the servants went back to the Qin mansion. Yi Liangqiu had summoned her once. He neither supported nor objected to her request for a divorce. She probably guessed that this day would come sooner or later. Qin Mu didn't go to work, so she had nothing to do in the hotel. That night, she went downstairs. Looking at the starry sky, she suddenly thought of the restaurant she used to go to. She wanted to go there again before she left. It had been 8 years, and she didn't know if the restaurant was still there. Qin Mu walked over slowly. She was surprised to find that the restaurant was still there, and it was the same as before. Even the customers were familiar to her. It seemed that there were still the same people coming and going. She stood there with tears in her eyes. It was as if she saw the 14-year-old Qin Mu sitting there, struggling to maintain her love. But today, the things she insisted on were gone with the wind. Nothing was left. She cried. The tears fell slowly, as if corroding her heart. The piano sounded slowly, and it was a familiar tune. Her body trembled, and she looked in that direction. It was Zhou Chongguang. He was wearing a gray sweater, sitting there playing the piano, and he didn't look like a teenager anymore. The sound of the piano was rusty compared to before. But he was still sitting there, overlapping with the ray of sunshine in her memory. Qin Mu's heart felt as though it had been struck by a heavy blow. She stood there motionlessly with an indescribable sadness in her heart. She did not know how many tears she had shed. She had forgotten how many people were watching her. She sat in her previous seat as if possessed, holding her chin and looking at him with fascination like a little girl. At this moment, she was like a nightmare, unable to resist. It was as if she had fallen into time and returned to the past. So did he. Moo moo, don't cry. A gentle voice sounded in his ear. Qin Mu raised her head and looked at the person in front of her. Was he the current Zhou Chongguang, or was he the old Zhou Chongguang? She couldn't tell. I'm sorry, Moo Moo. I'm back. He hugged her gently and said in a bewitching voice, don't cry. Qin Mu's tears fell like rain. She couldn't walk out of it. She regretted coming here. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she pushed him away violently. She stared at him and said, "Zhou Chongguang, we're getting a divorce." She almost screamed out loud, with unwillingness and indignation. She used to love him so much. It turned out that at this moment, she realized that she was just deceiving herself. Zhou Chongguang frowned and walked toward her step by step. "Moo, it's my fault. Can you go home?" He coaxed her as if she was a 14-year-old girl. He hugged her forcefully, not allowing her to struggle. He whispered in her ear, "I've banished Gu Mei to the United States, and I've also chased away those messy women. Moo, can we go home?" Chapter 21-27. Qin Mu looked up at him and kept looking at him. The tear in her eyes became a scar that Zhou Chongguang could not erase. She suddenly took a step back and shook her head. "You're not him." That teardrop slowly fell. "Perhaps you were never him." Qin Mu took a step back. "Zhou Chongguang, let's end it here." After saying that, she turned around and left. Zhou Chongguang stood behind her and asked softly, Moo, what do I have to do to make you come back?" Qin Mu paused for a moment. She didn't turn around and left quickly. She cried. Even now, she would still be sad, and she would still be sad because of him. She would still occasionally fantasize that he really loved her. But all of this was just a dream. Qin Mu walked faster and faster until she bumped into a sturdy body at the door. The smell was familiar. She looked up and saw Gu Zai. Qin Mu looked at the man in front of her in surprise. Hearing the footsteps behind her, she couldn't care less and begged him, "Take me away." Gu Zai looked behind him and seemed to have guessed something. He looked at her deeply and suddenly turned his body to the side, hugging her in his arms. He was very tall and covered her in front of him, completely blocking her. Her little head was pressed on his shoulder, and she was very, very close to him. She was so close that she could smell the faint smell of tobacco on his body. Unlike Zhou Chongguang had always smelled like a woman's perfume in the past few years. Gu Zai's body smelled like a man's. Qin Mu closed her eyes and tears fell. She had been hurt in the past few years. After all, she had really loved that person. Gu Zai held Qin Mu and walked quickly to the parking lot. The lights made his dark figure very long. On such a lonely night, for the first time, someone accompanied him. Walking to the side of a Land Rover, he opened the door for her to get in and walked around to sit down. Gu Zai looked at her tilted head and asked softly, "Are you okay?" Qin Mu turned her head, and there was still a trace of brightness in the corner of her eyes. Gu Zai sighed. He suddenly reached out his hand and gently wiped away the tear. "Don't be sad anymore." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "Why are you so good to me?" He held the steering wheel with both hands, looked at the dark night ahead, and smiled. "Qin Mu, don't you know?" After that, there was a period of silence. She didn't speak again. He turned his head and asked gently, "Where do you live?" Qin Mu looked at him and pursed her lips. "You don't know." Gu Zai smiled. He knew about her naughtiness, her quick-wittedness, and her cuteness, but Zhou Chongguang had always turned a blind eye to it. He started the car and drove slowly to Wenhua Hotel. They arrived in a few minutes. He sat there and watched as Qin Mu unfastened her seatbelt and got ready to get out of the car. He suddenly put his hand in front of her waist and trapped her. His voice was a little hoarse. "Qin Mu." She looked up at him. Gu Zai paused for a long time before he said slowly, "If there's anything, you can look for me." He took out a business card from the central control and put it in her palm. He had never courted a girl before, and she was now someone else's wife. Adding Gu Mei to the mix, it was already too much for him to do this. But he couldn't control himself. Chin-moo looked down at the business card for a long time and clenched it. Guze, you should know. Chapter 21-28. He only wanted her to be happy. He knew that she didn't like him appearing in front of her, so he wouldn't cause her any trouble. Just take it as me making it up to Gume. He smiled bitterly and suddenly reached out to rub her long hair. Chin-moo, don't think about others. Think about yourself. Chin-moo lowered her head and didn't say anything. She just gripped the business card tightly and got out of the car. She had no feelings for Guze and didn't like Gume. But, liking someone was not a sin. Therefore, she would not embarrass him, nor would she hurt him. Guze looked at the direction in which she left. He put his hands on the steering wheel and leaned back slightly. His fingers fell on his eyes and he felt a prickling pain. He knew that she was going to America. By then, he wouldn't even have the chance to protect her like this. Guze looked at her in a daze. He was still in a daze until the next day when he had a meeting at Boyi. Yi Muyun asked him to stay alone. I heard that you saw Chin-moo last night. Yi Muyun said quietly. Guze didn't say anything. He just lit a cigarette and smoked quietly. If it wasn't for Gume, I would rather you be the one by Chin-moo's side. Yi Muyun said calmly and then said, Guze, if I give you another choice now, one is to be with Chin-moo, and the other is to be promoted to the CEO of Boyi, which one would you choose? Guze looked at Yi Muyun. His lips moved but he didn't say anything in the end. Think about your answer carefully and you will know what to do. Yi Muyun smiled and got up to walk outside. Outside, Zheng Xini was waiting. When she saw Yi Muyun come out, she reminded him softly, Mr. Yi, Miss Song just called and said that there will be an art exhibition tomorrow. Please don't forget. The button that Yi Muyun was about to undo was buttoned up again. Frowning slightly, he glanced at Zheng Xini and said quietly, got it. If she calls again, tell her I'll be going tomorrow. Zheng Xini hesitated for a moment before asking, Mr. Yi, won't you pick up Miss Song? Tomorrow is very important for Miss Song. Yi Muyun's gaze was indifferent. Zheng Xini's heart skipped a beat. She lowered her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Yi. I've crossed the line. Just this once. Yi Muyun walked past her, his voice even fainter. Zheng Xini lowered her gaze and followed him. He pushed open Yi Muyun's office door and was just about to say something when he was reprimanded, get out. She was a little embarrassed, but she still retreated meekly. Her eyes were filled with mockery. Song Karen was never a big deal to Mr. Yi. Even her appearance was very deliberate. Because that person didn't come back, Mr. Yi found a girlfriend so that that person would think that everything was over. That person, indeed, came back. Song Karen was destined to be abandoned before she even got on the stage. Zheng Xini chuckled softly. This day had finally arrived. Inside the office, Yi Muyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the scenery of B City. He stood at the highest point, and everything he wanted was within his reach, except for her. She came back. A trace of pain appeared on his handsome face. Cher, what do you look like now? Do you still remember me? Yi Muyun pursed his lips, looking at the sunset and the tide. Just like that, he stood alone for 8 years. But she didn't know anything and just left. Chapter 21-29. The famous Silver Gallery in B City was exhibiting the works of some cutting-edge artists today. Almost all the people in the entertainment industry came to support, and there were also young artists invited by Song Karen to help. The exhibition hall was more than 2,000 square meters, and it was opened in the bustling area of B City, where every inch of land was worth gold. Some people said that it was all because of Yi Muyun that Song Karen could get such a location. However, Yi Muyun had never expressed his relationship with Song Karen. The reporters only photographed them together at most, and there was not a single intimate action. Song Karen was wearing a white xiongnu skirt, and her hair was slightly curled. Her makeup was bright, and she looked a little like the famous model Miranda Kerr. She smiled and answered the reporters' questions, and she was in a very good mood. Today, the works exhibited in her gallery were very popular, especially Ann's works. Famous people in the art industry all said that they were very profound and shocking. In fact, there was a painting called Rain Curtain that Song Karen also liked very much. On a rainy night, a young girl stood. She looked up at the sky, and in the distance, stood a young man holding an umbrella, walking towards her. The mood was very beautiful. Song Karen didn't want to sell this painting. She wanted to buy it herself and give it to Yi Muyun. She thought that he would like Ann's works. She held a glass of wine and answered the reporters' questions from time to time, while looking out the door. At about 10 o'clock, Yi Muyun came over. He came alone without any entourage, but he still caused a sensation. His appearance also confirmed the scandal between him and Song Karen. Song Karen looked at him and felt a burst of excitement in her heart, but she tried her best to resist going forward to greet him. When she stood with him and was photographed by the reporters, she really wanted to hold his arm. However, she didn't dare to. Yi Muyun had always been indifferent. He didn't deny or admit his relationship with Song Karen. After the photo shoot, Yi Muyun went to see the exhibition. Then, everyone realized that Song Karen's mind was not on the interview, but on Mr. Yi. However, no one dared to expose her, so the interview became useless. Until Ann appeared. Ann was the most promising artist this time. Her paintings were very heavy. When she appeared, the spotlights were flashing non-stop. However, the reporters were shocked to discover that Ann was Boyi's daughter, Tang Sher, who had been missing for 8 years. And now, Mr. Yi was also here. Was it a coincidence? After 8 years of separation, Mr. Yi had a beautiful woman by his side. The drama of the era was nothing more than this. The reporters were all waiting excitedly to capture the classic reunion scene that they wanted to capture the most. But almost immediately, they received insider information that they were only allowed to write about Ann's paintings in today's press release. They were not allowed to reveal her identity and emotional life. It didn't take much to figure out who incited this. Who had the ability to make the media collectively lose their voice. When Cher walked into the exhibition hall, she didn't know why, but the venue had been cleared. Only Yi Muyun stood quietly in front of her, curtain of rain. Listening to the footsteps, he gently turned around. His gaze was especially calm as he looked at her. She also stood there, looking at him. There was a hint of shock in her eyes. "Do you still remember me?" Yi Muyun's voice was very soft, his gaze never leaving her little face. She had grown up. The baby look from before had completely faded. Her little chin was very sharp, small and delicate, and she looked even more beautiful. She was 26 years old. Actually, she couldn't be considered a young girl, but when used on her, it didn't seem out of place at all. Chapter 21:30. Yi Muyun's gaze had been on her face the entire time, not shifting away at all. She, on the other hand, stood there, frozen and motionless. Because she had never thought that he would appear here. Yi Muyun smiled, looked past her, and said softly, "It's my girlfriend's art gallery. You should know each other." Cher's eyes were still fixed on him, as if she did not hear what he said. At this moment, there was only one person in her world named Yi Muyun. However, a moment later, Song Karen appeared beside him. He put his arm around Song Karen's shoulders and introduced her gently, "Cher, this is my girlfriend." Song Karen was surprised and delighted. She turned her head and looked at him. You know each other? Very well. He's my brother. Almost at the same time, Yi Muyun and Cher spoke at the same time. Song Karen's face was full of surprise. Really? That's such a coincidence. Yes, it is. Yi Muyun's eyes were still fixed on Cher's face, and he said calmly, we haven't seen each other for 8 years. Song Karen did not suspect anything. She smiled and held his hand. Then you two have a good chat. I'll go and entertain the guests. Yi Muyun tilted her head and glanced at her. Suddenly, she pulled her closer and hugged her shoulders. Let's have lunch together. Song Karen blushed, nodded, and left. After she left, Yi Muyun looked at Shue-er. Shue-er's complexion didn't look too good. It was pale and bloodless. In fact, she was wearing a black jumpsuit today, which made her waist look slender and her hands look white. It was very eye-catching, except for her pale face. Are you surprised that I have a girlfriend? Yi Muyun walked up to her and whispered in her ear. His voice was very soft, but there was a dangerous tension in it. Cher looked up and looked at him nervously. There was a touch of moisture in her eyes that he was familiar with. He thought she would cry. But she didn't. She forced back the tears in her eyes. She said calmly, congratulations. Really? His voice turned cold as he stared into her eyes. Yes, why would you care? You don't have a heart. For 8 years, there was no news at all. She was really heartless. She must have known that he had a girlfriend, which was why she came back. However, she never thought that this person was the Song Karen she knew. Shue-er lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. Perhaps. Excuse me, she murmured. I'll be away. She turned around, but her hand was held by him. Yi Muyun said sternly, do you want to leave again? She looked at him holding her hand and was silent for a moment. Yi Muyun, I don't remember much about the past. She finally raised her eyes and looked at him bravely. A lot of things can change in 8 years. For example, you have a girlfriend now. There was a warm smile on her face. I want you to be happy. Her tone was very calm, as if she was exchanging pleasantries with someone she hadn't seen for a long time. It made him look exasperated and petty. He should be angry. All these years, he had been angry at her. But now, when he said that he had a girlfriend in front of her, she was so calm. 8 years. Had she really changed? His handsome face was slightly distorted as he looked at the face that had disappeared for 8 years. Chapter 21:31. With that, she walked out of the room. And he had no reason to keep her, and his pride wouldn't allow her to do so. He looked at her back and closed his eyes. 8 years was indeed enough to change a lot of things. For example, changing a person. In the past, she was so transparent in front of him. But now, the words that she said were true and false. He could barely tell them apart. He stood there for half an hour before Song Karen appeared and said softly, "Ann left first. I asked her to have lunch together, but she said she had something to do." Yi Muyun said calmly, "I might have something to deal with at noon." Song Karen was stunned for a moment, and disappointment immediately appeared on her face. But she immediately adjusted herself and appeared very generous. "I'm fine, let's meet another day." She was already satisfied that he could come here today. When Yi Muyun left, the reporters' hearts were as clear as a mirror. Today, it was clear who was the female lead and who was the supporting female lead. Mr. Yi didn't appear here for Song Karen, did he? Yi Muyun's car left immediately. As he drove, he called Song Karen, "Send me the information on ANN's paintings, I want to buy them all." Song Karen smiled on the other side. "Mu Yun, are you doing this because of the favor or because you admire her paintings?" Yi Mu Yun softly spat out 2 words, "A favor." Song Karen pretended to be angry. "You treat ANN so well, I'm going to be jealous." Yi Mu Yun's voice was a little faint. "I grew up with her." Although his words were faint, in Song Karen's ears, it was almost like an explanation. Her voice suddenly softened. "Mu Yun, I trust you." Yi Mu Yun slowly put down the phone in his hand. Trust him? How ironic. He gripped the steering wheel tightly and drove in the direction of Pei Yuan. He guessed that she must be staying in Pei Yuan when she returned to B City. However, when he returned to Pei Yuan, he only saw Sister Lee and the servants. Cher didn't come back to stay. Sister Lee didn't even know she was back. She asked Yi Mu Yun, "Miss, why didn't you go home when you came back? This child has been gone for so many years. I don't know if he can get used to eating fast food outside. Without Sister Lee's soup to nourish him, I don't know how thin his body has become." The image of Cher appeared in Yi Mu Yun's mind. She had indeed lost weight. He didn't say anything and just smoked his cigarette lightly. Sister Lee was furious. She snatched the cigarette away from him and stomped on it twice. "Look at you 2 little ones. When do I not worry about you? One is abroad, and the other is here sulking all day long, living like a monk. I don't have one." Yi Mu Yun reached out and pressed his Sister Lee's shoulder. He smiled helplessly. "I have a girlfriend." "Who are you trying to fool?" Sister Lee said bluntly, "You are a serious girlfriend. Why didn't you bring her back to let your family see her?" All these years, although the young master didn't live in Pei Yuan, he was still a member of the Tang family. When Mr. Tang was at home, the young master often came to visit. She could see that he even hoped to see Miss come back. He had been looking forward to it for 8 years. Sister Lee didn't know what to say. She could only sigh. Miss is very vengeful. The young master had a girlfriend, so she couldn't let Miss know. Yi Mu Yun smiled lightly. "Actually, Sister Lee, I am also very vengeful." Chapter 2132. Yi Mu Yun smiled faintly. "Actually, Sister Lee, I'm quite vengeful too." Sister Lee glared at him. "Don't even think about it." Yi Mu Yun had wanted him to stay for dinner, but he still left. He returned to his apartment and made a call. "Can you help me find out where she is staying?" Not long after, the other side replied, "Miss Tang is staying in the presidential suite of GM Hotel." Yi Mu Yun was stunned. That place. He had stayed there for a while when he had just moved out. Later on, he had bought his own apartment and hadn't been there since. That was where they had stayed on the night of their engagement. That night, he had wanted her for the whole night. Those scalding memories were still burning his heart and his body, making him feel uncomfortably tense. "Got it," he finally said and slowly put down the phone. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his apartment and looked outside. From here, he could see the GM Hotel. And she was not far from him. What was she doing? Why didn't she go home? Was it because she was avoiding him? Did she not know that he had moved away? Or did his presence make her uncomfortable? Yi Mu Yun closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he felt a little pain. He stood there for a while and his phone rang. He took it out almost immediately. After looking at it, he was still disappointed. It was a call from Song Karen. He picked it up and heard Song Karen say, "Mu Yun, ANN's works are not for sale." Her voice was a little weak. She was probably afraid that he would be unhappy. Yi Muyun paused for a while before saying, make an offer until she is willing to sell. Song Karen was stunned. After a while, she held her breath and said, Muyun, what's wrong? Are you unhappy? She asked hesitantly, do you need me to accompany you now? She wouldn't let go of any opportunity to get close to him, even if he thought she wasn't reserved. Because she knew that he had always been indifferent towards her and didn't seem too satisfied. Because he was too outstanding and had too many choices, but she only had one chance. No need. He spat out a few words and hung up the phone. He thought that he should break up with Song Karen. Once upon a time, when he was in despair, he had also thought of finding a woman to marry. That way, he wouldn't have to wait any longer. Marrying a woman, having a child, even if she came back, he would not divorce her. Once everything was settled, his life would not change because of her. Song Karen had always been by his side. However, even though she had been by his side for 2 to 3 years, he had never made up his mind. Instead, he hated the person who had left him more and more. What right did she have to torture him for 8 years? 8 years. How many 8s did he and she have? She left decisively and returned without a care in the world. His heart was filled with resentment, but he had no way to vent it. He found that compared to 8 years ago, he was more passive. 8 years ago, she was a little girl who was scared to death of him. 8 years later, she was mature enough to stand up to him. An enhanced version of an idiot. He stood there quietly, his head lowered as he scrolled through his phone. Her number was still in his contact list. Idiot, he pressed his finger lightly and dialed the number. Over the years, he had tried to call her again and again, but her phone had always been turned off. But now, it actually went through. At that moment, he wanted to give up, but she had already picked up. She said calmly, I'm not selling that painting. Yi Muyun said mockingly, 10 million. Chapter 2133. Yi Muyun's voice was indifferent. But I really like that painting. Most importantly, it's adorable. There was a long silence on the other end before Cher said, it's not for sale to anyone. What if I'm the one renovating the wedding house? His voice was very, very soft. Cher's breathing was very soft. She almost couldn't believe what she had just heard. He said, wedding house. He and Song Karen were getting married. Cher's phone slid down, but the call didn't end. On the other end, Yi Muyun didn't hang up either. Although he couldn't hear her voice, he knew it was her on the other end. A world that was very, very close. After a very, very long time, the phone was picked up again. Her voice said, congratulations, brother. With that, she hung up the phone. But he heard a hint of nasal sound in her voice. Did she cry? Yi Muyun closed his eyes slightly. She still cared, didn't she? He stood there from dawn to dusk with extremely complicated feelings. Then, he looked at his phone and made a call. Song Karen was very surprised when she received his call. Muyun. Do you have time? Yi Muyun's voice was calm. He thought it would be better for him to talk to Song Karen in person. He had been with her for so long because he wanted to forget someone, but he hadn't succeeded. And now, he couldn't maintain that kind of relationship with Cher at the same time. Song Karen's voice was very soft. The exhibition has just ended. Muyun, let's go to the restaurant we went to last time, okay? As for her last request, he still agreed. Because of his attitude, Song Karen boldly asked, Muyun, I'm still in the restaurant. Can you come and pick me up? For the first time, she acted coquettishly. My legs are sore from wearing high heels all day. Okay, Yi Muyun replied very quickly. Song Karen couldn't believe it. She even thought that perhaps he would propose to her tonight. After all, they were already of marriageable age. She smiled faintly and touched up her makeup with lipstick to cheer herself up. When Yimuyun arrived, Song Karen smiled and stepped forward, getting into the black sports car. She sat beside him, looking a little shy, but he didn't say anything. When the black sports car arrived at the restaurant, it was already 8:30. As night fell, the parking lot was filled with the neon lights of B City. The night was a little cold. When Song Karen got off the car, he rubbed his bare arms. It's a little cold. Yimuyun wasn't someone who didn't have a bit of humanity, so he took off his jacket and handed it to Song Karen. Although she didn't do it herself, she was satisfied. Yimuyun put on his coat and walked to the atrium of the restaurant. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. It was Zhao Yan and Shui. They walked side by side. Cher put her hand on Zhao Yan's arm and looked up at him. At this moment, her little face was full of vigor, not pale like when she saw him. Zhao Yan lowered his head and looked at her with a very gentle gaze. When Yimuyun heard her call Zhao Yan little uncle, her tone was just like how she used to call him big brother. At that moment, his heart was filled with jealousy. Song Karen smiled and greeted, and, what a coincidence. She looked at Zhao Yan beside her. Is this your boyfriend? At this moment, Song Karen really wanted the whole world to be as happy as she was. Chapter 21:34. Cher stopped in her tracks and looked at them. The smile on her face was a little stiff. She looked at Yimuyun's jacket covering Song Karen. He was indeed with Song Karen. She smiled bitterly in her heart. It had been 8 years. It wasn't strange for him to have a girlfriend. Besides, no, he's my uncle. Cher forced a smile. Song Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Cher didn't say anything else. She held Zhao Yan's arm and said in a low voice, "Let's go in." Zhao Yan glanced at Yimuyun and then at Song Karen. He seemed to have understood something. In the past few years, he knew that Yimuyun had a stable girlfriend, but he had never seen her. He didn't expect to see her after Cher came back. Zhao Yan and Feng Jiu's appearance, "Muyun, let's eat together." Yimuyun's gaze fell on Cher's face for a moment before he said mildly, "Okay." He reached out and took Song Karen's hand. "Let's go in." Song Karen's face instantly turned red. She thought that Ann was his family and Zhao Yan was his friend. Did this mean that she had been acknowledged? Her steps were a little light, and she couldn't help but feel happy inside. The group entered together. Because Zhao Yan was the boss, he immediately arranged the best seats. The 4 of them sat at the same table. It was a delicate scene. Zhao Yan and Cher had grown up together and were related by blood. Over the past few years, they had been in contact with each other in America. He knew her diet like the back of his hand and naturally decided what she wanted to eat for her. Yimuyun listened to Zhao Yan's voice. His eyes narrowed and he looked straight at Cher. If they weren't related by blood, he would have thought that they were together. Cher had been quiet the whole time. She wasn't like the little girl who always pestered him to talk. She had changed. She had become less talkative. He controlled himself and didn't look at her all the time. He pretended that the past was in the past. If she could do that, so could he. During the meal, only Song Karen was talking. Cher would occasionally say a few words. Zhao Yan suddenly stood up, "Excuse me. I'll go up and play a song." Cher raised her head and smiled. "Okay." Zhao Yan asked with his eyes, "Is there really no problem?" After all, he was the man she had loved for so long, and she might still love him now. Moreover, there was another woman by his side. Cher shook her head. Zhao Yan was the same age as her, but because he was an elder, he doted on her a lot. Sometimes, it was the younger generation who doted on her. He caressed her long hair and kissed her forehead. I'll be back in a while. Cher watched him leave. She looked down and heard Song Karen laughing happily, and, are you really related to Zhao Yan? I think you two are a good match. Cher forced a smile. Really? She didn't look at Yi Muyun because she knew he was looking at her. She lifted her eyes and looked at Zhao Yan, who was on the stage. His hands were placed on the piano keys, his long fingers gliding over. The audience was a little excited. Because it was Die Sir Alice. Such a song always had a deeper meaning. It was said that Zhao Yan came with a beautiful girl. When Cher heard him play this song, she was also stunned. She remembered playing this song when she and Yi Muyun got engaged. That night in the hotel suite, this song was played the whole night. Chapter 2135. Zhao Yan looked over and smiled at her. There were tears in Cher's eyes. She smiled too. Little uncle. He was always so good at comforting her. He knew what she was thinking. In fact, the two people sitting opposite her already made her feel terrible, but she had no choice but to sit there. She didn't want to admit defeat. She didn't want to run away every time she saw Yi Muyun. Zhao Yan was still playing. Song Karen was mesmerized. She turned to Yi Muyun and said, Muyun, let's use this song for our engagement, okay? The atmosphere became more subtle. Yi Muyun looked at Cher and said slowly, Cher, what do you think? Cher's gaze fell on his face. There was a hint of moisture in her eyes. After a long time, she said softly, it's up to you. Song Karen looked at Yi Muyun expectantly. Let's talk about it later. Yi Muyun didn't give a direct answer and said lightly. The sparkle in Song Karen's eyes dimmed. She felt a little uncomfortable. After all, her behavior just now seemed like a forced marriage. However, she could tell that Muyun and Ann had a good relationship. Muyun always asked for Ann's opinion on everything. So she thought that she should make an appointment with Ann alone and persuade her to put in a good word for her. At this moment, Zhao Yan came back and sat down. He stroked Cher's hair. Do you like it? Cher smiled weakly. I like it. Zhao Yan smiled, like a prince on a white horse. He had a gentle temperament, unlike Yi Muyun's fierce temperament. He didn't hide his love and pampering for Cher. He showed it openly in front of Yi Muyun. He was Cher's little uncle. It was natural for him to treat her well. When Cher gets married in the future, little uncle will play for you at the wedding. He looked doting. Song Karen was very envious. Although Yi Muyun was very outstanding, he was also very cold. Which girl didn't like a boyfriend who doted on them? And, if only I had an uncle like him. Song Karen's words were not without meaning, but there was also a hint of complaint. However, as she spoke, she smiled at Yi Muyun. There was a very sweet feeling in her smile. Cher smiled faintly. Do you think you can call him Mr. Yi, little uncle? Song Karen almost spat out a mouthful of dessert. She had never thought that the cold and aloof Ann would make such a joke. So for a moment, she didn't know what to say. Yi Muyun took a deep look at Cher and didn't say anything. The atmosphere was still subtle. Only Song Karen felt that it was a good family gathering. She even suggested that the two groups go to the movies together, but Zhao Yan rejected it. He smiled. Cher needs to sleep early. I will send her back to the hotel later. Song Karen sighed with a look of pity. All right, I will go with Muyun. Maybe it was tonight that gave her courage. She felt that she could finally become a regular employee, and not a girlfriend who only had one meal a week. Yi Muyun didn't say anything, and his expression was a little unpredictable. Zhao Yan had finished the last mouthful of wine. He stood up and pulled out the chair for Cher. It's getting late. I will send you back early. He paused and suddenly said, it's not convenient to stay in the hotel. Do you want to move in with me? Chapter 2136. After Zhao Yan finished speaking, there was silence. Cher was a little surprised, while Yi Muyun's expression didn't look too good. Only Song Karen's envious voice could be heard, you guys have such a good relationship. Even with their relationship, she and Yi Muyun didn't live together. From the bottom of her heart, she hoped that Zhao Yan's words could remind Yi Muyun. Nowadays, it was common for engaged couples to live together. Furthermore, they had been together for 2 to 3 years. Didn't he need it? If he had a need but didn't look for her, his girlfriend, to solve it, could it be through other channels? Song Karen thought a little too much. She looked at Yi Muyun timidly, hoping that he would be touched. Yi Muyun looked at her and said calmly, I'll take you home. When the two groups separated, they seemed a little distracted. Yi Muyun sat in the car and watched Zhao Yan's car leave through the rearview mirror before starting the car. Perhaps Song Karen was too excited, she turned her face and joked, Muyun, you and Ann grew up together, but Zhao Yan and she are related by blood. Their relationship is different. You seem to be jealous. Yi Muyun tightened his grip on the steering wheel and said, really? Song Karen nodded and turned her head to say excitedly, Ann is quite cute. She's the same age as me, but she looks like a little girl in her 20s. She paused for a moment and said carefully, will she call me sister in the future? These words were equivalent to forced marriage. She knew that he might not be happy to say it, but she couldn't help it. Muyun, I'm a little tired. All these years, I've been waiting for someone I like. Song Karen turned her head to confess. This wasn't being reserved, but she couldn't care less. Yi Muyun's car stopped outside her apartment. He didn't say anything and just looked at her. Muyun, I want to have a family. Song Karen's voice was a little choked. Are you willing? He sat for a long time and said calmly, I can't do it. Let's stop here. Song Karen's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Yi Muyun's voice was calm. I've thought about marrying you before, but I couldn't make the final decision. Song Karen's lips were trembling, and so was her voice. So, you've never been in this relationship? He sighed softly, I'm sorry. I like someone, and I've liked them for many years. Song Karen shook his head. I don't want to hear this. Muyun, I can wait. I won't force you. I'll wait. She lowered herself to an infinitely lowly position, begging him to give her a chance. But he firmly refused, don't be like this. But, marriage needs love. You don't love me now, but it doesn't mean you won't love me in the future. She was like a trapped beast, her fingers holding his arm, tears falling down. As a terrible man who had wasted 2 years of her time, he could not be completely heartless towards her. Yi Muyun took a tissue for her and said in a low voice, in this life, I'll probably only love one person. Why did you choose me, since you love her so much? Song Karen murmured, still unable to accept this reality. For Yi Muyun, this was a difficult experience. Chapter 2137. If Cher didn't come back, maybe one day, he would marry her. But the moment he saw Cher, all the blood in his body was revived. He knew that he had no feelings for Song Karen. He had been deceiving himself for the past 2 years. I can only apologize. He said in a low voice, I will make it up to you in my own way. Song Karen looked at his face and knew that he had made up his mind. She shook her head in a daze. I don't want anything. I just want you. She wanted to get close to him, but she didn't dare. She could only look at him and cry. I'm sorry. He apologized again and got out of the car. He opened the door for her personally. I'll take you to the elevator. His words seemed considerate, but in reality, they were forceful. Song Karen's whole body was weak, so she got out of the car. She never thought that the happiest day of her life would end with a broken heart. When they got into the elevator, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. Mu Yun, did you really not love me? She didn't believe it. If there was no love, how could she be with someone for 2 years? Yi Muyun let out an end sound, and in return, Song Karen's tears fell like rain. But the elevator door was already closed. Yi Muyun stood outside the elevator quietly for a while, until Song Karen's elevator reached her floor. He had done his homework for tonight. He asked his secretary where Song Karen lived and which floor she lived on. He played the perfect boyfriend who had broken up with her. When they were together, he had never been nice to her. As for compensation, he had already prepared it. It was enough to save her 10 years of hard work. And if Song Karen was smart, she wouldn't announce to the media that they had broken up. That was exactly what he wanted. He turned around and got into the car. He smoked another cigarette and couldn't help but drive to the headquarters of GM Hotel. The car stopped and he walked into the lobby. The receptionist was stunned and stood up. Mr. Yi, why are you here? Yi Muyun's tone was indifferent. Give me the key card to room 2608. The receptionist rejected him in her heart. Mr. Yi, Miss Tang is staying there now. It might not be convenient. One was the crown prince, and the other was the princess. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. Yi Muyun didn't say anything and just glanced at her indifferently. The receptionist couldn't take it anymore. She obediently handed over the key card and whispered, Mr. Yi, this is against the rules. Within the GMs, everyone knew that these two had collapsed. Furthermore, they had collapsed for many years. Mr. Yi has a girlfriend now, and he has Miss Tang's room card. What's the meaning of this? No one dared to ask. They could only watch as Yi Muyun went upstairs. When he stood at the door of the suite, Yi Muyun's facial muscles were a little twisted. He had seen her twice, but both times were in public. He couldn't do anything, let alone say anything. Now that he was here, truly alone, he really didn't know what he would do. He felt that there was a wild beast living in his heart, ready to pounce on her at any time. He unlocked the door, opened it, and entered. The light inside was dim, and there was an English country classical music playing. The air was filled with the faint scent of roses. There was also the sound of water. Yi Muyun stood at the door of the bathroom and confirmed his thoughts. She was asleep. Chapter 2138. There were pink flower petals floating in the bathtub, and that was where the faint fragrance was coming from. He squatted down and scooped up the water. He wasn't sure if it was the flower petals or her body that smelled good. At that moment, his body woke up, and he felt that he could drink her bathwater. His palms touched her uncontrollably, waking her up bit by bit. When Cher woke up, she was sitting in his arms. Almost immediately, she could feel the man's burning gaze behind her. Her little face was pulled to the back and he kissed her forcefully. It was hot and scalding. It was intense and lingering. She moaned as she looked at the handsome face in front of her with her eyes wide open. When she realized that it was him, she struggled violently. However, her strength was nothing compared to his. Very quickly, she was scooped up by him and laid in his arms in an unbearable position. He cupped her little face and kissed her again and again, so deeply that he almost kissed her soul. Yi Muyun, you bastard. She had no choice but to bite him hard when his large palms were about to do evil things to her. He let go of her in pain. Cher swam to the other side. She started to curse at the perversely huge bathtub. She didn't even swim for a while before he caught her again. This time around, he didn't kiss her again. He just placed her on the edge of the bathtub and asked coldly, "Why do you want to stay here?" Cher's breathing was erratic as she stared at him. "Didn't Song Karen satisfy you? Did he let you go around provoking people like a wild beast?" Wild beast. He pinched her little chin with one hand. Just 2 fingers were enough to make her cry in pain. Who was the one who begged the wild beast to have her and not stop? He said mercilessly. Cher's face was pale and she was a little embarrassed. She didn't struggle anymore. After all, she had seen everything that she should have seen in the past. She was silent for a while before she actually laughed. "Yi Muyun, what do you miss about the past?" His face was a little pale. "Tang Cher." She laughed so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. "It's been 8 years, and you have a girlfriend now. You don't want to let her go. It's even funnier than your possessiveness in the past. Are you blaming me for leaving?" Cher lowered her head. "What can I do?" "Yi Muyun, tell me, can you watch Qin Mu die and then sweetly call Auntie Yi Mom?" She looked at him. "It's because of your extreme love. If not for it, we wouldn't have come this far." His expression became even more unsightly. So this was her true intention. It turned out that he hated her, and she also hated him. "Hate me?" he asked her softly. Cher lowered her eyes. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Maybe. After all, we were really in love at that time." His mouth was full of bitterness. He had so many things to say, but in the face of her few sentences, it was actually so pale. "Mumu and Zhou Chongguang are getting a divorce." In the end, he squeezed out such a sentence. Cher pursed her lips and stirred the water in the bathtub with her hand. She said lightly, "So what? That doesn't change anything." She smiled. "I'm no longer an 18-year-old girl. I like my current life." His face turned pale. She said that she liked her current life. Did that mean that she was suffocated in the past? Chapter 2139. As he looked at her, his face twitched slightly. It wasn't like he hadn't seen this side of Cher before. At that time, she had used all her rationality on someone else. Not him. In front of him, she was always clumsy, like a little deer running around, and her heart was in a mess. But now, she was saying this to him calmly. He frowned. Cher laughed. "Yi Muyun, what do you want me to do? Be your mistress? Or will you break up with Song Karen?" He said hoarsely, "What if I break up?" She lowered her eyes. "But I don't want to." He looked at her quietly, watching her calm look. At this moment, she didn't even have a decent piece of clothing on her. She was so calm. Yi Muyun propped himself up and leaned against the edge of the bathtub. He even wanted to smoke. He looked at her for a long time before getting up. His entire body was drenched in water, and his face was so gloomy that water could drip from it. Cher kept propping herself up and didn't slide down. After a long time, she finally cleaned herself up and walked out in her bathrobe. He hadn't left yet. She found a towel from somewhere and wrapped it around herself. His clothes were piled at the bathroom door. Yi Muyun reclined on the sofa in the living room, holding his cell phone in his hand. His gaze was deep. She walked over and sat down opposite him. She looked up and said, "It's getting late. Chasing me away. His voice was hoarse. Cher laughed. Yimuyun, shouldn't you stay away from others when you're with a girl? He looked at her and asked softly, have you become that other person too? Yes. Cher sighed and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room. She stretched out her arms and pulled the curtains open. The night view of B City was in full view. She stood there with her slender back straightened. He looked at her and knew that she was different from the past. That bashful little thing disappeared. His throat was a little choked up and he couldn't put it into words. But he didn't say anything. I know you hate me, but what do you hate me for? Her voice drifted over. Qin Mu is alive and well, and you are also well, and have a very good girlfriend. You think I'm doing well? His voice was hoarse. Cher was silent for a while before she said, are you okay? You made it through. She turned around and looked at him quietly. Her small body was wrapped in a bathrobe. She was very petite, but she seemed to be very powerful. Yimuyun narrowed his eyes. He's not good at all. How could she think that he could live well after she left? He reached out, but he couldn't touch her. She had always been so far away from him, just like 8 years ago. Yimuyun smiled faintly. You've grown up now. Him coming here tonight was simply asking to be humiliated. However, he didn't forgive her either. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Cher looked over. Yimuyun said calmly, she's my secretary. He walked over to open the door and let the person come in. But when that person came in, Cher was stunned. Zheng Xini. She murmured. Zheng Xini had changed a lot. She was much prettier, but Cher could still recognize her. She had actually become Yimuyun's secretary. This was ridiculous. Chapter 2140. Faced with Cher's shock, Zheng Xini was much calmer. She just smiled and said, Tang Cher, long time no see. Cher stood there and didn't respond immediately. She looked at Zheng Xini and her eyes were even a little cold. Is there a problem? Zheng Xini was still smiling. Do you think it's a little unbelievable that I, who stayed back for a year, became the secretary of Boyi's CEO? Cher calmed down and looked at the ambitious woman in front of her. She chuckled and said, it's quite unbelievable. She didn't say much, but Zheng Xini couldn't figure out the truth in her heart, and her face was a little pale. Yimuyun took the bag from Zheng Xini's hand and said calmly, Secretary Zheng, wait for me outside. Zheng Xini pursed her lips and left. After she left, Yimuyun looked at Cher. Don't you want to ask why I want to use her? Cher turned around and looked at the night view outside for a long time before she said calmly, why do I have to ask? It's something you've decided long ago. He looked at her back view and suddenly suppressed his voice. Does everything in B City have nothing to do with you? It's your private business. It has nothing to do with me. Her voice was very soft. Yimuyun, take your secretary and get out of here right now. Do I make you feel disgusted? He stared at her back, probably because he wanted to make her feel uncomfortable. Cher suppressed herself. Yes, it's disgusting. But I think Song Karen will feel even more disgusted if he knows. She opened the window. Because they were on the top floor, the wind poured in as soon as it came down. It was so strong that it could almost blow them over. Yimuyun had just changed his clothes and stepped forward to close the window. He looked at her coldly. Are you crazy? It's none of your business. She said almost willfully. Get lost. However, Yimuyun suddenly grabbed her shoulder and pushed her towards the French window behind him. Her slender back bumped into the cold, hard glass, and it hurt. Behind him was a bone-chilling cold, and in front of him was a bone-piercing heat. Yimuyun's palm was enough to hold her down. His dark eyes were deep. Does it have nothing to do with you? He lowered his head and whispered into her ear, then why do you look so angry? His thin lips moved down, he bit her lightly, causing her to moan in pain. I'm not Zhou Chongwang. I won't mess around with a female secretary. His voice was secretive. Cher leaned against the glass, her body trembling slightly. She would also be afraid of falling. But when she struggled, it was as if she was getting closer to him, forcing herself into his embrace. She did not move and her body was almost frozen. She narrowed her eyes and glared at him. I said it has nothing to do with me. He stared at her for a long time before she took a breath. Yimuyun, the person I liked before is not a despicable man. Let's keep the good times we had in the past. I'm glad that you still have praise for me in your little mouth. He said with some mockery, and then he let go of her. The moment he let go, Cher ran to the sofa and hugged a wool blanket. Her little face was buried in the wool blanket, revealing only a pair of eyes. Yimuyun, leave. He glanced at her and didn't say anything else. He walked out directly. Chapter 2141. But no matter how much she scolded him, he couldn't hear it. When Yimuyun walked out, Zheng Xini was still guarding the door. When she saw him come out, she immediately straightened up and maintained her best posture. Mr. Yi. You can go back first. Yimuyun's voice was indifferent. Zheng Xini pursed her lips. Mr. Yi, I think I'd better send you back. I'm worried about you like this. Yimuyun looked at her quietly for 2 seconds before saying, do you know why I called you here? There were so many people who could have sent him clothes. Why did he look for her? The moment he asked this question, Zheng Xini's expression turned ugly. The smile froze on her lips. She was well aware of his intentions. He was just using her to make Tang Cher feel uncomfortable, but she still had a Cinderella dream. She still thought that she could show off in front of Tang Cher, but she was wrong. At most, she was just a chess piece. Moreover, her boss didn't mind letting her know what she was used for, so she gave up on that idea long ago. Zheng Xini was indignant, but she couldn't do anything about it. Yimuyun was invulnerable. She even suspected that Song Karen had used despicable means to stay by Yimuyun's side. But later, she understood, Song Karen was just a substitute. Or rather, not a substitute at all, but just a decoration. Yimuyun had a girlfriend, but he still lived like a monk. She could imagine how awkward it must have been for this girlfriend. However, Song Karen was very interested, so she didn't want to expose her beautiful dream. Look, Tang Cher came back, and Song Karen immediately had to stand aside. Zheng Xini smiled lightly, but her smile was bitter. She didn't know when, she had changed the direction of her life. By the time she realized it, there was no way out. When she came back to her senses, Yimuyun had already walked far away. Zheng Xini stood there quietly for a while before leaving in her high heels. Upstairs, Cher stood alone on the top floor. Her small body exuded a sense of loneliness. After a long time, her phone rang. She walked over and took a look. It was Song Karen. Why is she calling at this hour? Cher's intuition told her that it wasn't related to the art exhibition. It should be a private matter. If it was a private matter, then it was related to Yimuyun. She pursed her lips and answered, Miss Song. Song Karen stared blankly for a moment, then said with red eyes, and, don't alienate me like this. Cher's voice was indifferent. We're partners to begin with. There's no problem with that. Song Karen took a deep breath and said, but I feel terrible right now. And let's go out for a drink, okay? What's up? Cher was indifferent. After discovering the relationship between Song Karen and Yi Muyun, she had already decided to stop working with Song Karen. However, she wouldn't talk about business at night. Song Karen was a little cold, but she felt that and was the most suitable candidate, so she had to find her. In the end, Cher agreed and made an appointment at a bar. After hanging up the phone, she changed her clothes and went out. The bar wasn't very far from here. It was a 10-minute walk, so Cher didn't drive. When she reached there, she was surprised to find Song Karen already there, and she was half drunk. Her white chiffon dress was gently pulled open, revealing a little spring. Cher walked over and sat opposite her. What's wrong? She didn't want to deal with Song Karen, but she had no choice tonight. Chapter 2142. Song Karen drank a little too much. She looked up at Cher with a mug in her hand, laughing and crying, and, he broke up with me. Cher was shocked in her heart, but she still looked calm on the surface. Her lips moved slightly. Why? Song Karen smiled gently. He said he liked someone for a long time, and that he couldn't fall in love with me. As she spoke, Song Karen cried out, and, do you know that I've been with him for 2 years? I can't lose him. She held Cher's arm tightly and said anxiously, do you think he wouldn't break up with me if I took the initiative and got pregnant with his child? Cher's arm had turned purple from her pinching, and it hurt. She felt a little ridiculous in that pain. Tonight, Yi Muyun first, and then Song Karen took turns to torture her mentally. Why did they treat her like this? And did Yi Muyun think that they could be together if he broke up with her? Everything had changed. She couldn't say that she had completely forgotten him, but she was afraid. She didn't dare to touch him easily. Her voice was low and light. Maybe, you can give it a try. Song Karen was stunned, and, I thought you were trying to persuade me not to do this. Cher suppressed her voice. If you love someone, you'll try your best to keep him, by hook or by crook, right? Just like her and Yi Muyun in the past. He chose her at that time. In fact, he had always chosen Qin Mu. They were both his biological sisters. He didn't really make up his mind. She just helped him make up his mind. Cher thought self-deprecatingly, she was the victim. She had escaped abroad for 8 years. Why did she have to suffer like this when she came back? Let them have their children. Let them have as many as they want. Her heart ached a little, but she didn't care. Anyway, it had been so painful for so long. It didn't matter if it hurt a little more. Song Karen was still in shock. Then she smiled and poured a glass for Cher, and, give me courage. Cher looked at the mug on the counter and smiled. She picked it up and drank it in one gulp. Song Karen clapped his hands and laughed maniacally. Great, and we have to celebrate today. What are you celebrating? Cher smiled faintly. Her face was slightly flushed, but she was not drunk. She was no longer that little girl who would get drunk after drinking a little. Song Karen propped her chin on her elbow and smiled foolishly. To celebrate the smooth opening of our gallery and the fact that I was dumped by a man today. Snow poured herself another cup and said without batting an eyelid, to celebrate your wish being fulfilled. Song Karen suddenly leaned close to Cher and said in a warm voice, and, do you have any experience? Cher looked at her. Will it hurt? Song Karen was really drunk. She dared to say anything. And Muyun, is there something wrong with him? Why doesn't he touch me? Cher's body trembled. Song Karen's smile was intoxicating. But I'm not afraid of pain. What I'm most afraid of is him leaving me. There were already a few ANs in front of her, but Song Karen was still drinking. She was drunk. Cher looked at her lying on the floor and shook her head. Let me send you back. She reached out to support Song Karen and called a taxi outside the bar. Chapter 2143. Before Cher could say anything, Song Karen had already told the driver an address. Cher didn't think much about it and asked the driver to go there. It's not good for two girls to drink like this. It's dangerous. The middle-aged driver said warmly, "Don't use the DD Express at this time. It's not safe for beautiful girls like you." Cher just smiled. "I'm not drunk." "You're drunk." "I said you're not drunk." The driver chuckled. Cher didn't explain anymore. Alcohol had become numb to her. No one knew that she used to numb herself with alcohol all day long. Only when she was drunk could she control herself from returning to that person and stopping herself from looking for him. Sometimes when she woke up, she almost didn't know where she was. She had also lived a ridiculous life for more than a year. Without her brother and Yimuyun, she didn't know how to live. At that time, she suspected that her body was full of alcohol. At that time, she would rather die than live. Later, alcohol had no effect on her. No matter how much she drank, she was always sober. Later, she stopped drinking, she learned painting and locked herself up for more than 2 years. Slowly, she finally calmed down. 8 years. Cher leaned her head against the window and refused to think too much. The driver drove to the apartment that Song Karen mentioned and helped her get out of the car. Cher paid the driver. "Wait downstairs for 10 minutes. I'll go back to the GM hotel later." The driver heard this and said, "That's where the rich live." But looking at this apartment, only the rich in B City could afford to live in it. The location was absolutely first class. 1 square meter cost more than 200,000 yuan. 100 square meters would cost 20 or 30 million yuan. Cher didn't say anything. She simply helped the drunken Song Karen up the stairs. When the elevator reached the top floor, Song Karen leaned against the door and smiled seductively. "And thank you for taking me to Muyun's home," she yawned. "Goodbye. What happened next is not suitable for children." Cher narrowed her eyes. Only then did she realize that this was not Song Karen's home, but Yimuyun's. Her facial muscles twitched unnaturally. She forced a smile and retreated into the elevator. When the elevator doors closed, Song Karen's alluring smile was still in front of her. She thought that no man could refuse a woman's request, let alone a drunk woman. The elevator went straight down. 1 minute passed, but she felt that the time was especially long. It was only a minute, but it felt as long as a century. When she walked out of the elevator, she felt a chill on her face. She reached out to touch it, but it was cold tears. Only then did she realize that she had cried. Why was she crying? She didn't know. It was like she was in a dream, and she didn't want to wake up. The taxi was still waiting, and there was a small red light on the roof. These tiny specks of light were simply salvation for her. Cher immediately opened the door and got into the car. "Let's go." The middle-aged driver smiled as he drove, willing to chat with the beautiful girl. This little girl was a lot more beautiful than before, and she had an indescribable temperament. "You're colleagues with that little girl just now?" the middle-aged driver asked in a very gossipy manner. Cher looked at the flickering lights and shadows outside the window. Hearing the driver's words, she withdrew her gaze. "No, she's my boss." The driver laughed dryly. "You must be joking. How could that be possible?" Chapter 2144. It was obvious that this young lady came from a wealthy family. She was a far cry from the drunk girl just now. "Perhaps they used to be rivals in love," Cher mumbled. "The person I used to like is now with her." The driver was stunned for a moment. Then, he swallowed hard. You young people are really brave. If it were back in our days, if we met a rival in love who was drunk like this, we would have thrown her on the street and gotten someone to kill her. Cher was in a low mood, but she was amused at this moment. Is she really that good? Of course. The middle-aged driver nodded affirmatively. At that time, there were 2 girls in my village who got into a fight because of me. It was really intense. They fought from the front of the village to the back of the village, and from the back of the village to the front of the village. I was in a dilemma. The driver smiled warmly. They were both good-looking. I was really in a dilemma for a while. Cher also smiled. The middle-aged driver sighed. Young lady, it's better if you don't smile. You might as well cry. No one will laugh at you. You look uglier when you smile than when you cry. Snow reached out and gently touched her cheeks. There were tears in her eyes. After a long time, she said softly, I've long forgotten how to cry. Because when she cried, there was no one else she could rely on. The driver was speechless. He sighed again. Men are like clothes. Don't worry too much about them. The next one will be better. Cher nodded and didn't say anything else. On the other side, Song Karen was banging on the door with all her might, calling out Yi Muyun's name. When Yi Muyun came out to open the door, he was a little surprised. He stood at the door, wearing a bathrobe. However, he blocked the door and had no intention of letting Song Karen in. Song Karen looked at him and was stunned at first. Then, she worshipped him with her eyes and mumbled drunkenly, Muyun, are you happy to see me? She was clearly drunk, and it was obvious that she was quite drunk. How did you get here? He frowned. Song Karen smiled a little foolishly. Ann sent me here. I said I wanted to be pregnant with your child, so she sent me here. Yi Muyun's eyes narrowed. Cher. Song Karen's whole body hung on him, her face resting on his shoulder. Her voice was very low, Muyun, I don't want to break up. Let's be together, okay? She lifted her head, eager to kiss him. However, he avoided it. Yi Muyun's voice was very calm. You drank too much. We have already broken up. But Ann said that as long as we have children, we can be together forever. Song Karen looked hurt. Muyun, you said that you like me. He closed his eyes. He had never said that. Song Karen's gaze blurred. Suddenly, she took off her skirt, and let it fall beside her feet like an umbrella. She didn't block herself and just looked up at him. Her voice was soft and dreamy. Muyun, let's be together, okay? Forget that person. I'll be a very good wife. Put on your clothes. He pushed her away without any pity. Song Karen took 2 steps back, feeling a little embarrassed. She was also a little sober. She looked around and saw his ashen face. She slowly came back to her senses. She also realized that she had angered him. However, this was all because she loved him. Muyun, please, take me. She suddenly knelt at his feet, hugged his leg and said meekly. Chapter 21:45. Yi Muyun did not look too good as he looked down at the woman who was begging him. He was angry, but not at Song Karen. He was angry at that damned Tang Cher who sent her here. But now, he had to get rid of Song Karen. Song Karen was staying here by herself. It was obviously inhumane to kick her out like this. Yi Muyun thought for a moment, bent down, and slashed the back of her neck. Song Karen fell down softly. He picked her up and walked straight in, arranging her in the guest room. When he came out, he looked at the bright lights outside through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His heart was as calm as still water. He did not sleep. He stood there quietly, as if he could see through the darkness and see the person he was thinking of. He stood there for the whole night. It was not until dawn that Song Karen woke up. She opened her eyes and looked at the clothes on her body. She was stunned for a while and felt slightly disappointed. She smelled again. Oh, it smelled terrible. After thinking for a while, she went to the bathroom to take a shower. She dried her hair and came out wearing only a bathrobe. The sky was already bright. Yi Muyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was wearing the same white bathrobe as her. Song Karen had sobered up and returned to normal. But in her heart, she still could not bear to leave him. She walked over barefoot, hugged his firm waist from behind, and rested her face on his back. Song Karen's voice was clear and light. Muyun, let's not break up, okay? I'll agree to whatever you say. I won't force you to get married. I just want to be by your side. He did not break away from her immediately. It could be considered as giving her one last tenderness. He said hoarsely, I'll make it up to you. From the beginning to the end, he knew very well what kind of role Song Karen had played. Song Karen shook her head vigorously behind him. Muyun, I don't want any compensation. I only want you. Her slender arms tightened, and her red lips whispered seductively, let's be together, okay? She kissed his back, but he did not move. Song Karen kissed him, and her red lips kissed his chin seductively, moving up along his good-looking chin. The moment their lips touched, Yi Muyun slowly said, enough. Song Karen was unwilling to stop. She tiptoed and kissed him infatuatedly. Muyun, am I not good enough? She even suspected that there was something wrong with him. Otherwise, why didn't he have any reaction when she was like this? Song Karen didn't want to believe it. Her slender fingers moved downwards, then she froze. He clearly did that. She raised her head and murmured softly, why do I have to endure? Why do I have to suppress? Yi Muyun gently pushed her away, his face cold. It's just a man's reaction when he gets up in the morning. If it doesn't, it means there's something wrong with me. After being kissed like this by a woman, he wouldn't be a man if he didn't have any reaction. Song Karen's gaze immediately dimmed and his lips trembled slightly. To her, this was a form of humiliation. His body clearly wanted her, but he didn't touch her. I'll have someone send some clothes over. Yi Muyun said indifferently. He took out his cell phone and dialed Zheng Sini's number. He had only said one sentence when Song Karen slapped his cell phone onto the ground. She had never been so daring before. She looked at him, panting and pursing her lips tightly. I don't want it. Yi Muyun looked at her quietly. His voice was indifferent. My patience is limited. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.